There's a small group of people who vividly remember the sound of a dial-up internet connection and the satisfying click of a rotary phone. And if you're one of them, you probably feel like you don't fully belong to any generation. If you were born in the late 70s or very early 80s, you exist in a kind of demographic no man's land. You're technically on the oldest side of Millennial or the younger side of Gen X, but neither label ever felt quite right. And that's because researchers have finally identified you as something else entirely, a micro-generation, often called the Oregon Trail generation or Xennials. What makes this slice of history so unique isn't just the toys you played with, but the way the world around you fundamentally transformed during the most critical period of your brain's development. Let's start with your childhood. You grew up in a completely analog world. Boredom wasn't a problem to be solved with a screen. It was just a state of being you had to endure. You memorized your best friend's landline number because you had no other choice. If you missed an episode of your favorite show, that was it. It was gone forever, becoming a topic of whispered speculation on the playground the next day. You had to be physically present to make plans, trusting that your friends would actually show up at the agreed time and place, because there was no way to text running late. Then, almost overnight, as you were stepping into young adulthood, the entire infrastructure of human connection flipped. It wasn't a slow evolution, it was a rapid revolution. Your late teens operated on one set of rules, and your 20s operated on an entirely different digital one. You remember creating your first email address, the sheer novelty of it. You signed up for Friendster, then MySpace, and finally you joined Facebook, but only once it opened up beyond college campuses. You went from having maybe 3 ways to reach someone, home phone, work phone, or a knock on their door, to having a dozen different apps and platforms, all demanding your attention. This unique timeline has a profound psychological basis. Research on neuroplasticity, particularly a landmark study published in Nature Neuroscience, shows that our prefrontal cortex, the command center for complex decision-making and adapting to new situations, continues to develop well into our mid-20s. This means Xennials were in a state of high cognitive flexibility when the entire technological landscape was being rebuilt from the ground up. You were young enough to absorb this new digital language like a native, but old enough to fluently remember the analog mother tongue. It's created a kind of psychological bilingualism that is incredibly rare. Gen X, who were already established adults, can sometimes view technology with a healthy dose of skepticism, seeing it as a tool to be used, not a world to live in. Younger millennials and Gen Z, on the other hand, have no real memory of a world without the internet. It's simply the air they breathe. But you, the Xennial, can do both. You can sit through a 2-hour dinner without instinctively grabbing your phone because you remember what it was like to be truly, gloriously unreachable. Yet you have no fear of learning a new software platform or adapting to a new social media network. You possess a sort of digital dexterity that older generations can lack, and a pre-digital patience that younger generations never had to develop. And this duality extends far beyond just gadgets. Consider your relationship with your own past. You grew up in a world where embarrassing moments, that terrible haircut, that awkward phase, that disastrous karaoke performance, lived only in the fading memory of those who witnessed them. They became stories, edited and softened by time. Research into autobiographical memory tells us that our brains are designed to be fluid. They prune and reshape memories, allowing the painful parts to fade and the meaningful parts to stay. But when every single moment is documented, geotagged, and searchable, that natural process is disrupted. You're frozen in a permanent amber of your own past. Xennials are the last generation to truly experience the freedom of forgetting, and the first to grapple with the permanence of being online. But here's the other side of the coin, and this is where the psychological profile gets more complex. What happens when the world you're so adept at adapting to suddenly collapses beneath you? You entered the workforce right as the 2008 financial crisis hit. This wasn't just a bad economy, it was a systemic shock that wiped out career paths and financial security for millions. You were in the exact life stage for building a foundation, and the ground gave way. Studies on economic trauma show that experiencing significant financial instability in your 20s and early 30s creates a lasting psychological imprint. It rewires your relationship with money, risk, and security. It creates a persistent low-level anxiety, a voice that whispers, "What if it all falls apart again?" that doesn't just go away when the economy recovers. So you have a group of people who are uniquely equipped to handle change, but who are also burned by it at the most vulnerable time. This creates a fascinating paradox, doesn't it? You possess the self-reliance of Gen X. You were a latchkey kid. Your parents didn't micromanage your schedule. You learned to solve your own problems, to navigate conflict without adult intervention, to be bored and figure it out. This gives you a core of independence. Yet you also carry the scars of a systemic failure that happened just as you were trying to stand on your own 2 feet. You are both skeptical and optimistic. You value cooperation but are fiercely independent. You are analog and digital. What truly defines the Xennial experience isn't the nostalgia for a lost world, but the ability to hold these contradictions without feeling torn apart by them. You remember what we gained when we connected the world: instant information, global community, endless possibilities that your childhood self couldn't have fathomed. But you also know intimately what we gave up. We lost the quiet patience of waiting. We lost the ability to be completely alone with our own thoughts, without a constant feed of input. We lost the deep presence that comes from a conversation that has no possibility of being interrupted by a notification. If this resonates with you, you've probably spent your whole life feeling slightly out of sync, a little too young for the Gen X nostalgia, a little too old for the Millennial memes. You're caught between 2 worlds, and that's not a flaw. It's your defining characteristic. You've successfully navigated one of the most profound societal shifts in human history. You've learned that the environment you were born into isn't necessarily the one you have to live in forever. You've learned how to adapt without completely losing the core of who you were before. In a world that is only going to change faster, that experience, that hard-won ability to hold on to yourself while everything around you transforms, might just be your superpower. It's the quiet wisdom of the micro-generation that belongs everywhere and nowhere. If this deep dive into the psychology of place and time struck a chord with you, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to Stickman Says for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.